some of my kids in it. So this has been a great opportunity for not only me as an individual, but as a family that has really kind of developed into a passion. My wife might say it's an obsession, but it's a healthy one at that. So a couple of things we're going to hit on tonight. History of beekeeping, the bees in the hive, equipment needed, and then we'll touch base on where to get bees. So hopefully you'll get something out of this presentation tonight, and chances are you're going to leave with a lot more questions, and that's actually what I want. I'm going to give you some basic stuff, and then there's just a lot of depth of knowledge that you can acquire, but we'll just hit the kind of the basics tonight. So before we get into actually about bees, there's a couple of things that is kind of good that we go over. First is, no matter what others do, your experience and comfort level will determine how you do everything. And what I mean by that is as you're getting involved with bees, you might look up on YouTube and see some guy with a tank top and shorts on, and he just opens up the lid of his beehive and goes in there and finds his queen or does whatever. You're not going to have that comfort level at first, and in some cases should never have that comfort level. So it's really a go at your own comfort thing. And another thing is, if there are 4 beekeepers standing in a circle and you ask a question, you're going to get 5 or 6 different answers. And the reason of that is because every time somebody hears somebody else's answer, by the time you go around that circle, a couple of people are going to change their mind. There's just a lot of different information and different approaches to beekeeping. And this other part on the internet, you can find anything you want on the internet and to support whatever you want to believe. So as you are starting in beekeeping, I'd recommend that you try to find a couple credible sources. And there's a lot of, well, we all know, enough said about the internet. And then last, I don't claim any credit for any thoughts or pictures in this presentation. So, history of beekeeping. I want to start first with my history of beekeeping. The very first time I got exposed to bees. I didn't have any experience with bees, but I did have an interest. I'd gone to a couple of beekeeping classes in a format similar to this, and I got a friend that called me and told me about a swarm of bees in a tree. I didn't have any equipment with me. I was actually over in Dallas, and I live in Cass County, and with the swarm, I was worried they were going to leave the next day, and I was so excited about them. So the only thing open at like 11 o'clock that night was Walmart. So first we made sure the bees were there, and this is a picture of the swarm, and you can see them. They were just tucked in this little, it wasn't even really a tree, more of a shrub at my eye level, and so it was the perfect scenario. So we head out to Walmart, and this is what we came up with for a bee suit. And it is what you think it is. It's a laundry hamper. And then this is me in it. So with an $8 laundry hamper and some duct tape and some gloves, me and a friend were getting into the bee business. And as you can see here, this is just a quick picture right before we were starting to get into capture that swarm, that it worked. It was only worked for that one time, but it got the bees. And actually from that swarm, there's many people that have bees as a result of that one swarm that we caught. So there's depictions of humans, cave drawings, collecting honey and interacting with bees that go back to about 10,000 years ago. If you do any looking on the internet this is a famous drawing, and it's a prehistoric cave drawing found in eastern Spain, and it's just somebody climbing up the side of a cliff and getting honey out of there. So from Greek mythology to the pyramids in Egypt, bees are scattered throughout human history, and we've literally been stealing honey from them for thousands of years. What started as, most of the time, it was total devastation of a beehive to get the honey. Now we've got hives where we can steal the honey without a lot of impact on the beehive itself. So, bees in the hive. This is a picture of an entrance to one of our hives. And you can see all these ladies out here. Those are all, most of what you're going to see there is all worker bees. And then this is another picture from the top, just taking the top off and looking down, and you can see that that hive is loaded with bees. So who's in there? We got essentially 3 bees in there. We've got a queen, we've got the worker bees, and we've got the drones. So if you look here in the center, we've got our queen. On the left, we've got our worker bee. On the right, we've got our drone. So one of the things that you'll notice right off the bat is the abdomen, or this backside of this queen, is a lot longer than this worker bee and this drone. It's the thing that really makes her distinct when you're looking for her. So this is a queen on one of our hives, and then around her is just different worker bees. Sometimes it's easy to find the queen, and sometimes you won't see a queen in a hive for ever. They're just depends how many bees are in there and what's going on. This is another picture of a queen, and she's right there. So the queen, she's the only reproductive female in the hive. There's usually only one per colony, and she's the mother of everybody, all the hive workers and all the drones. She can lay between 1,000 and 2,000 eggs a day. And I've even read in some places they claim it's as high as 3,000 eggs a day. And that's going to vary depending on what time of year it is. If it's in the winter time, she's going to be laying very little, if any, at certain times. And then if it's in the spring, or right before the spring, when they're really building up, she can be cranking out a lot of eggs. One unique thing about her is she only eats royal jelly. And we'll talk a little bit more about royal jelly in a minute, but that is a special substance that from the time she hatches as an egg, it is what determines that she is going to be a queen. And she's the longest living bee in the hive. The workers, they're non-reproductive females. They do everything in the hive. They do the house cleaning, they tend to the brood, and the brood is just all the youth of the hive, right? They've got different stages that we'll go over, but they go from laying an egg to larvae to a pupa, and then they emerge as an adult bee. So they're gonna, anytime you hear the word brood, that is the area that or not the area, but that's who we're talking about. They also tend to the queen, and they build comb. They regulate the temperature of the hive. So a couple of other things they do the pollinating. They gather pollen, they gather nectar, and they make honey, and they also defend the hive. So if you have a question on who's doing something in the hive, the answer is always the worker, with the exception of laying eggs, and that's our queen's job. The drone, he's the reproductive male of the hive. They don't do any work inside the hive. They don't care for the brood, they don't care for the queen, they don't produce wax, they don't forage, pollinate, they don't make honey, they don't do anything inside the hive except for use up resources. Their only purpose is, and if they're lucky and accomplish this purpose, they die. So their only purpose is to breed a queen. So what they do is they hang out in these drone congregation areas, and they leave the hive, and I don't know how they find these spots, but they all find these magical spots where it's just a bunch of drones hanging out, and all they do is just fly around there hoping that a queen is going to come by. Once they mate with a queen, they die almost immediately. So the lucky ones that get to fulfill their purpose, they die. All the other ones, when it comes time for winter, all the other worker bees are going to push them out of the hive, and then they die, and there's no more drones in the winter. So they really only have that one purpose. One kind of unique thing about them is they don't have a father. They only have the queen. So when she is laying these eggs, she can determine if she's going to lay a fertilized egg or a non-fertilized egg. And the non-fertilized egg is going to be the drones. So from egg to adult, so the queen takes 16 days, the worker bee takes 21 days, and the drone takes 24 days. And we'll kind of walk through this life cycle. So you can see on here, there's an egg, and then there's essentially 4 stages. There's the egg, the larva, the pupa, and then the adult bee. Now, they're all eggs for 3 days, and I think they're all larvae for 6 days. The time that they're the pupa is what makes a differentiating factor in the bees. So the queen bee, like all the bees, the first 3 days that they're a larva, they fed royal jelly, and all the bees that are at that age, that the larvae of that age, get fed royal jelly. It's the best food in there. It is what takes her in from the worker bee category and makes her into a queen. So after day 3, workers and drones, they're fed bee bread, which is just a different food for them. And if a worker is continued to be fed, a female larva is continued to be fed royal jelly, it's going to develop into a queen. So queens, they're reared in these elongated vertical queen cells. And here's an example. If you look at the bottom of this frame, I don't know how many we can count here. If there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I think there's 8 in that picture there. And then here's another example. This is in the middle of a frame, and there's multiple queen cells that you can see here as well. So our worker bees, they're eggs for 3 days, they're larvae for 6 days, they're a pupa for 12 days, and then their adult life can be really short. So in the summertime, when they're working really hard, they might only live 4 to 6 weeks. And in the winter time, your bees might live 4 to 6 months. So the bees that are in your hive in November or December might very well be the bees that are in your hive in March. So one thing that illustrates is just how hard it is on a bee when they're foraging. And the big difference is they're not leaving the hive very much during that time. They're not gathering all the resources needed to survive. So the drone is a pupa for 15 days, and they live about 1 season. The queen is the pupa for about 7 days, and her total, it takes about 16 days to make a queen. Once a queen is made, they stay in the hive. Now, if there's multiple queen cells, like you saw in my illustration a little ago, as they're getting ready to emerge, they're making these noises and they're talking with each other and they're finding out where everybody's at. And then as they emerge, they have a little fight, and the queens are going to fight each other until there's only one of them left. That one will take a little time to recover from her big battle, and she might be in the hive for a week or so, and then she's going to go on her mating flight. That essentially is going to be the only time she leaves the hive. Now, sometimes they have multiple mating flights. Some people just say they just have one, but she's going to be in there in that hive until it's time for when she thinks she's going to swarm. And so queens, they can live up to about 5 years. There is a lot of discussion right now on the vitality of the queens. Some people have to replace them every year. I talked to some beekeepers that have been in doing bees for a long time, and they can remember a time when a bee lasted 5 to 8 years. I think the more common thing that I'm seeing now is probably averaging 2 to 3 years, just depending on what type of beekeeper it is. So the workers' responsibilities, we talked about that, but they perform their task according to their age. So a 1 to 2 day old, and this is as it is emerged as an adult, they're going to spend all their time cleaning their cells. The first cell that they clean is their own, and then they're going to start going through the hive cleaning cells. 3 to 5 days old, they're going to feed the older larvae. And then 6 to 11 days old, they're going to feed the youngest. And then somewhere in the 12 to 17 days old, they're going to be producing wax, carrying food, building combs, and even removing dead bees. So they'll have their undertaker duties. 18 to 21 days old, they're on guard duty. And then after that, the rest of their life is just going to be spent collecting pollen and nectar and water and doing all those types of things outside the hive and bringing resources back to the hive. There's a lot of discussion. There's and as you get into bees, many of you might have heard of these. There's the small hive beetle, and it'll probably get talked about a little bit in the hive management maybe. But one of the things that's interesting on that, and so hive beetles aren't as big as a concern as they used to be. It seems like a lot of these bees are able to kind of police them up and put them in a corner, and they put these guard bees on it. But what some people are finding out is they believe it's the older guard bees, and that it actually might make them a guard bee just a little bit longer. So if it, they might go from 18 to, somebody have a question? Oh, sorry. So it might go from 18 to 21 days to 18 to 22 or 18 to 23 days. And when you're talking about the removing days from that bee, the honeybee, going out and collecting pollen and water, it can have a pretty significant impact. So there's a lot of studies on that, and you can look up some more information on that. But as you get into inspecting your hives, you can pop it up, the top off, and you can see many times you'll see some beetles all bunched up in a corner, and the bees just have them pushed over there. And when you take the hive, it kind of open, it kind of allows them to escape. But it's just one of those interesting things. So in here, we've got a picture of a larvae, and I don't know how you spell, I don't know if it is with an E or without an E, depending on what book you're reading. Everybody has a little bit different. But if you look towards the center cell, you can see this little, it looks like a little C shape, and that's a really young larva. This right here is capped, a lot of this is capped brood, and when we're looking at it, you can see there's some open cells, but all these little cells right here are all worker bees. And we know that because the drones look a little bit different. this is an example of some capped drone brood, and it kind of protrudes out of the frame, and it almost, I've heard it described pretty good as it looks like the tip of a .22 bullet, just poking out of there. And if you look here to the left, you can see this is what the worker brood looks like, and then this is the drone brood, and it's a definite difference that you'll get to experience once you get in there. You'll know exactly what you're looking at. So some equipment needed. You need some type of hive and some tools and clothing to work safely. So whether you start your beekeeping career as I did at a Walmart, just getting a laundry basket, or you can do a little more planning. So a couple of the hives that I'm going to talk about are the top bar hive and a Langstroth beehive. So this is an example of a top bar hive. This is one of my daughters, and this is actually her standing next to it. Top bar hives are not the most common hives that you're going to see. For myself, for younger people and people that need to be concerned with what they're lifting, it's an awesome way to go. So my daughter and even my sons, as they're working their beehives, they can work through the whole beehive all by themselves without having to lift anything heavier than just a frame. So here's a picture of her just pulling a frame out as she's doing her inspections. And another thing is, you'll see on the other style of hive, it's not as intrusive because you don't disassemble their whole house to get in there and do some looking. And so it's a really good option. And this is just another picture of her looking. And as you look at the bottom of the screen, you can see how the hive frames, and these are frames, what she's holding up, it kind of spaces out more as she moves them back and moves more towards the front of the hive. And this is a picture of what it looks like from inside the hive. One of the things that these sides are angled, and one of the reasons is, and I don't know who discovered the angle, but at about this angle, the bees don't build their hive, their frame onto it as much. They still build their frame out to it. Sometimes they'll attach it, but for the most part, if you've got this angle on the side of those hive, it will keep them just drawing out that comb down in between them. So a couple of advantages. Now you can go buy one from a bee store, but you can also make them. I think the ones we've made with our kids, just going to Lowe's and getting some lumber, I think they've averaged probably about $35. A big advantage is you can work the hive without any heavy lifting. And another, like I mentioned earlier, you don't have to totally disassemble the hive to get it out. The Langstroth hive, it's the most common hive that you're going to see. The next slide will have some breakout of these sections. But these sections at the bottom here, these are called deeps. And then the smaller, more narrow one up there is a super. So these deeps, if that's full of honey, it could weigh anywhere from 80 to 100 pounds. Or if it's a mixture of honey and brood, it could easily weigh 60 to 70 pounds. This top one is a super. Sometimes they'll get brood in there. This particular one has a queen excluder on it, and it prevents the queen from going up in there. And if it's filled up with honey, it can be 40 to 45 pounds pretty easily. So you can see when you're going and working with the hive, to have to move that weight off of there, you want to take that into consideration as you're getting into beekeeping, is you want to do something that you're going to be able to do and not have to wear your back out. doing it. So this illustration, they've got 2 deeps at the bottom. There's a it's sitting on a bottom board, and then this is what is called an entrance reducer. So when you're just starting out a hive, or you have a hive that's a little weaker, a lot of times you want to close off that entrance so they don't have so much they have to guard, because other bees can come in and rob them out and take all their good resources that they're working so hard to build up. So you can put an entrance reducer on there and just limit where a couple of bees go in and out. And then as they get stronger, you could take it out. So in this hive, in this illustration, they have 2 deeps and then a medium. It is very common that we see most people using deeps on the bottom, but you don't have to. One thing you could do is use all mediums, so you don't have quite the heavy lifting. And the bees, they don't mind. They'll build just the same. And then in here we've got our removable frames, and then an inner cover and an outer cover. So this is a frame from a Langstroth hive. This particular one has all this yellowish capped off material is honey, and they're working on filling up this. So they put the nectar in there, and then they'll turn it to honey. This is another frame, and that one's a brood. So bee suits, there's every different kind of bee suit available. These 2 of my kids, they have full suits. So there's no openings at the waist. It's just cinches around your boots, and then you've got your gloves over it and a veil, and it gives you a lot of protection. This is my daughter and one of her friends, and you can see they've just got the jackets on, and both of those will work fine. It'll go back to what you're comfortable doing. There's sometimes that I wish I had a one-piece suit. I just have a jacket like this, and it works fine. And then sometimes I get zapped on my knee, and I think, oh, I should get a one-piece suit. Like I mentioned, gloves. You definitely need some kind of gloves, and not just regular leather gloves. You want something that's going to go up your forearm to give you a little bit more protection. For tools, and this will just be the basic tools to get started. If you get online, you can go to the catalogs of some of these bee suppliers, and there's an endless amount of tools that you need. But top on the list is a smoker. And one of the main reasons you need that is going to be your best friend. If you get the bees a little excited and you go to reach for your smoker and you don't have anything in there, you're going to realize how important it is. And one of the things that it does is bees communicate with these pheromones. They release these chemicals into the air. So when you open up a beehive, if you get some bees excited, they're going to release an alarm pheromone, and then that's going to get more bees excited, and that's going to get more bees excited. So it's a slippery slope that you go down, where if you give them a little bit of smoke, kind of, in my opinion, helps mask that pheromone, and a lot of times they'll go about their business. You'll have a few come out and see what you're doing. There's many different philosophies on what the smoke actually does. I've heard, and I actually believed this for a long time. I don't believe it anymore, but at one time I was thought that when you put a little smoke in there, they think there's a forest fire, and they get busy trying to get some resources so they can fly off and escape the fire. And I'm sure there's still a lot of people that would follow that line of thinking. I'm more along the lines of it just mask the pheromones that they're communicating with. This here is a hive tool. These are two different examples. A very important piece of equipment to have with you. As the bees are working, when we just put these boxes together, they're not sealed up. You just take a top box and put it right on the box below it. And the bees, they go out and collect this propolis and they seal it all up. They don't want to have any drafts going through their hive. Also with the frames, they'll take that propolis and they'll glue these frames together. And so without a hive tool, getting in there and separating the boxes or even just pulling out the frames would be nearly impossible. So that's definitely a must on your list. And then this is a bee brush. It's on the semi-necessary. I used to always take it down with me when I went to check our bees, and now not so much because we have a good distance that we walk to where we've got our beehives located. So a lot of times the bees are off of us before we get back, but it's really good just for your level of comfort. If you have some bees on you and you can just want to gently brush them off, it's a great way to do that. And then also if you're pulling a frame out, say you're pulling some honey out, you might just brush the bees off with that too, kind of softly. A couple other pieces of equipment are a feeder, especially if you're getting a new hive. Resources are the best way we can help these bees. So when you first get a new hive, they've got a lot of things they're trying to do in building up their resources, and one of the things that you might have to do is feed them. So with this feeder, this one just sits on the top of the hive, and the bees actually come up from the middle and access the sugar water that you put in there. This is another type of feeder. It's an entrance feeder. It's also for doing sugar water, and here you can see it on the hive there. And then this is another example where you would take a frame out of your hive and you would slide this feeder in there, and you could pour your sugar water directly into it, and then you could feed them inside the hive. So how to get bees? There's a lot of different ways. Obviously, one of them is if you're lucky, you can catch a swarm. A lot of times, though, starting off, that's not the easiest way that it works out. So one way is you can purchase nukes, like that's what's shown here. This is a 5-frame nuke, meaning that it's got 5 frames of bees in there. It's going to have some brood. It's going to have some honey. It's going to have some capped brood. So they're going to have some resources with them. Another way is you can purchase packaged bees. And packaged bees you can actually buy from, you can just get on the internet and order packaged bees, and they'll ship them to you in the mail. So swarms, online ordering. And then the last one here, I've got your local bee club. And in my opinion, that's going to be probably your best place to get bees from. Not that you have to go join a bee club, but if you get people that are involved in a bee club, a lot of times they can help you with questions that you have. If they've been a member of that club for a while, you can know that, or you can find out if people have good success with their bees. I had a good friend that got into bees, and the first year he bought 2 nukes, and he got them in the spring. They did great, built up in the summer, and then in the wintertime, they died off. They didn't make it. So the next spring, he went to the same beekeeper, bought 4 more nukes. The same thing happened that following winter. They built up good going into winter, and then winter happened, and they didn't make it coming out the backside. So the next year, he bought 6 hives and had a good buildup, went into winter, and then I think he had 1 make it through. So a couple of things with that example is, for one thing, and I don't know where he got those nukes from, but if you're buying bees that are local to where you're at, they're not that they have to be acclimatized, but there are bees that are going to do, there are genetics that are going to do better in certain areas than other areas. So where we're at, or where I'm at in East Texas here in Cass County, we have pretty mild winters. But if you start going up into Missouri or Iowa or up into North Dakota, it's going to be a lot different and a lot different duration to the winter. So I'm going to want bees that do good in my environment. And so that's why I kind of recommend going with the local bee club. Not that the bee clubs will sell them, but you can find individuals that are selling nukes. And then a lot of times as beekeepers get into it, we get excited and you start thinking you need all this equipment. And so your initial outlay of money is, if you're not conscious of it, it can make you have the most expensive honey you're ever going to have. And so a lot of times people will sell nukes, and it kind of helps offset what they've done. Many times you order in the fall and pick up in the spring. This time of year right now, it's going to be, if you're wanting to purchase bees, it's going to be a challenge. You can find some, but we're going into summer. We're going into kind of the end of the honey flow where we're at, as far as I'm concerned. A lot of the clover starting to dry up, and a lot of the nectar sources are going to start dwindling down as we get into summer and the heat starts ramping up. So if you do get bees now, you're going to have to feed them to get them through this summer until we get into a honey flow in the fall. But a lot of times people will take orders for their bees, and in the fall into the early parts of the spring. But you'll notice a lot of the better beekeepers, or the better quality people, they'll sell out of their bees pretty early. So that's just something they need to take into consideration. And then I've got my contact information. If anybody wants to email me or text me or call me, you can do that at any time. I'll answer any questions that anybody ever has to the best that I can. I'm by no means am I an expert in beekeeping, but I definitely want to help people out, and hopefully others can find as much enjoyment as what my family and I have in it. So, Jesse, that's all I've got. Have any questions brought in, or?
We didn't have any questions in the chat, but does anybody have anything they want to add or any questions?
I've got a question. This is David Headley here. I just recently built three horizontal hives. For those learning about it, it's like a top bar, only it uses Langstroth frames. So it makes pretty convenient. Being disabled, it'll make it easier over the years to maintain them. And I'm not going to do migratory hives. But after putting the colonies in, I've not seen the queen in one of the hives, and there's a lot of resources and brood in it. And a lot of the brood is capped. Is it possible that she could run out of room, and I'm not finding her or the eggs right now in that third hive, and I'm just seeing the signs every week when I go in of just a couple of large larvae?
Boy, that's a hard question. It could be anything. I mean, the biggest clue is you always want to look for those eggs. And if you're not seeing the eggs, you're going to want to just pay more attention. Did you say you have 3 of them, or?
Yes, I've got 3 colonies of bees, and 2 of them are starting to make queen cells. So they haven't put any eggs or closed them in yet. I'm going to inspect them again tomorrow. But as I've just gone and been worried about them, I mean, I checked them after a week and then after 10 days, and I know in the life cycle, all the brood will be capped, which will let you know if you see any uncapped brood, that you've definitely got a queen who's laid within the last 10 days.
Right.
And that's just the math I've been doing, is that if not today, at least 10 days ago, I've had a queen each time I've looked. And I've only been checking on the colony. I've had them maybe 4 weeks now, if that long.
So have you noticed a less amount of bees there, or?
Actually, I've got an increased number of bees. One of the things I tried doing in the design was I cut some vents through the top inner covers, and I put the plugs back into those holes that are screened over, just so that they're not having to warm themselves up so much at night. And I found that I've got more bees, and they're using less of the sugar that I put in the feeder. I know that you typically don't put sugar in right now, but I've done so to make sure that they've got enough stores in there, because they depleted all. I had some full frames of honey in all 3 hives, and they ate all the honey already. And I wanted to make sure they had some food, so I figured I was making them burn up too much energy at night.
Yeah, well, especially if they're building up, they're going to use a lot of resources. And as the honey flow starts early into the spring, there's a lot of hives that I think that's probably the highest risk area for bees to starve, is during that time, because people think, well, there's a honey flow going on, there's flower, there's nectar, but as they're raising that brood and increasing, they use so many resources. It's a good idea that if it's not a fully I don't want to say matured hive, but for a lack of a better word, you need to give them those resources, or make sure they have it. One thing to keep in mind is the whole purpose of bees is to increase colonies. It's not to increase numbers. So as they build up, they start their build up in the spring. A queen could stay in there and keep making more bees. Boom, 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 boom. But when they think that they've got enough resources in there, that's when they're going to want to start to swarm. And many times a sign of that is when you start seeing queen cells. Sometimes it's an issue with the queen and they're going to supersede her and they're going to replace her. But a lot of times it's swarming. So I would just, like you're doing, pay more attention to it. Some people, as they're going, they feel comfortable destroying the queen cells and think that will help keep their hive from swarming. But you have a big risk if you're doing that. For one thing, they might just split, and then you took away their best chances at raising another queen. So I don't know if that has any help to you or not.
It was my plan with those cells is I'm going to let them ride for now in case I can't find that queen or something happens, and then I will try and preserve them and move them into that third hive that's questionable. And if they end up eating the queen out of the side, well, then I know I got a queen in there still. So
right.
I appreciate it, John. Thank you.
You bet.
So we have had a couple more questions. Michael and Kristen asked if there was a way to get a printed copy of the presentation, and I just told them they could send me an email, and we could share that with them if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then Shannon asked, how much land do you recommend to set up your hives?
You could do it in town. There's not really there's a big urban beekeeping movement where people do it on the rooftops of buildings. One thing that you do want to take into consideration when you're setting up a beehive is, and there used to be a cartoon that I had seen where it has a guy standing inspecting his beehive, and he's got his bee suit on and he's all geared up, and then his neighbor next to him is peeking over the fence, and the beekeeper saying, "Oh, don't worry about it, they're harmless." And so just as you're doing those if you're in a smaller environment, you want to be cautious of where you place that hive in regard to your neighbors. Some people I've seen where they build a little 6-foot tall fence around their beehive. So they make a little enclosed yard just so the bees have to go up to at least 6 feet before they head out. Otherwise, if you just put it in the corner of your yard, as they leave the beehive, they might, go up a couple of feet, but then they're going to dart to wherever they're going. So it kind of helps control the traffic and makes them go up more.
And I see that Amy has her hand up. Amy, you can go ahead and unmute.
Hi, John. Thank you for the presentation. It was wonderful. And could you discuss a little bit about whether or not you have pollinator gardens?
So right now, nobody in I don't have a pollinator garden per se, but nobody is allowed to mow the clover in my yard. And so when you even just drive down our driveway, the clover on each side, right now, the only thing that's left is this arrow leaf clover, and it's like 3 feet tall. So nobody can use the lawnmower at our house until that all dries and falls off. Aside from that, we have some fruit trees and try to create an environment where they're good, but we don't have a pollinator garden per se.
Thank you very much.
Amy, I could speak on that a little. I'm not a beekeeper, but I love a vegetable garden. And so I have actually installed pollinator gardens specifically to attract pollinators. And we also are doing a swarm capturing research project right now. And so I've gotten very familiar with the sound of a swarm approaching. And about 2 weeks ago, I was out filling up water troughs and I heard that sound. And so I know there's a swarm in one of my trees around my house, which is excellent because we put in extra effort and plant lots of native varieties of plants to attract many different pollinators, but we definitely have honeybees as well now.
Wow, thank you. That was very interesting. Appreciate it.
Wendy, I see your question. Will pollinator gardens be covered as a future topic? We will talk about some of that. Next week, I will be sending out another email probably in the morning with the link to next week. We're going to be hearing from the Texas Apiary Inspection Service, where we're also going to talk a little bit about the Master Beekeeping Education Program that they can offer, which is an online self-paced class. I highly recommend it for anyone who's interested. And I think that beyond just educating you, that could potentially even set you up to teach. Like it's really great in-depth information. But we will be talking about pollinator gardens in a future program.
All right, I'm going to get rid of myself there.
Danny, if you want to receive the email with the link, go ahead and send me an email. It's above in the chat. It's jessica.reimel@ag.tamu.edu. Trey, we will address diseases in the hive management topic. We're going to talk more about parasites. We actually have a master beekeeper he has a mentor program. It's actually his business. He's with BM Dooney Farms, but he is going to be talking about diseases and more in-depth hive management. So I think we'll cover a lot of those topics that y'all are interested in. If you want to get the emails and you're not, like I said, shoot me an email. And if you have any other topics that you're interested in hearing about, or you want us to get specific on something, send that to me as well, because I would be happy to make sure we include that. Does anyone else have any questions? Yes, Amy, through Texas A&M, there is a master beekeeping program. She left the conversation. I hope she heard that. So if that is all of the questions you have, y'all can go ahead and log off whenever you're ready. I did record this. I will send out the link via email to this recording so that you can look back if you need any additional information. And I will also include the link to next week's.